guys, Tom here with Green Mountain Projects, bringing you a pretty sweet video today of a little install we'll be doing on my 20 Ram 1500. So, lift kit, rough country suspension systems, 3.5-inch lift level, so 3.5 in the front, and it's probably like 1.5 inches or so in the rear. On top of doing the lift kit, we are also going to be upgrading the coil springs in here because this lift reuses the factory coil springs in the rear and the factory struts in the front. But I got some HD upgraded coils that we'll be putting on the rear and the front. One to upgrade to help out with the sag that comes from that heavy move bumper. And then in the rear, instead of putting back our factory coils, we will be putting in these new HD coils, which will help with the sag in the rear and improve our towing capacity. So to give you a look at my truck, this is how it sits. Tires that are on it right now, we have 295 60/20s, so it's about 34 by like 11.5 wide. So there's absolutely no rub. My truck did come with a front leveling kit, as you can kind of tell. The idea here is just to give us a little bit more ground clearance, a little bit of a taller stance. With the added new HD coils, it'll perform better. I will actually be taking apart some other stuff on my truck that you don't have to do for this install. Really, all it is I'm doing some other things, like I'm touching up my bumper and my running boards, and then I'm also replacing my grill with a color match grill, so it'll actually aid in giving a better visual on what I'm actually doing when I'm installing this stuff. All right, guys, so let's get into components of this rough country lift. So first thing, with this kit, it comes with either the spacers, which, or you can get the lifted strut itself, so you're not going to be reusing your old strut. So with that strut, that is good if you actually do a lot of off-roading and a lot of articulation. Not as a big deal for just a daily driver. That's why I went with the spacer, because it's a lot more practical for that. And it can be restored back to stock really easily. You do get rear shocks regardless, because you have to upgrade these since you will be adding distance and you will be maxing out your OEM. So basically you can either get their normal grade one, which is included in the kit, or you can upgrade for like $200 and get these nice monotube shocks, which will improve your rides. I decided to do that to improve the ride in the rear, especially since I'll be stiffening up the suspension a little bit when I'm towing. And then we have the main portion of this kit. Just on the presentation of the box, it seems like rough countries are upgraded there. Packaging, nice big QR code will take you right to the installation instructions. It also does come with them in paper form. Now getting into the kit, this is your preload strut spacer. So this is what goes in the strut. So you have to take the strut apart to slide this down around the shock. These are your studs and nuts that go on your top of strut spacer. So basically you have to press these bolts in. They have splines on them, so they hold and they won't spin once they're in here, but you got to press them into the hole. Just use them like a vise or something, or if you got a press of some type. So that is what goes on top of your strut. And here is one of your upper control arms. You have your rough country decal, your rough country warning label decal, and your rough country service reminder decal. Our first layer of foam. Now we're coming into the next set of your upper control arms. It has a R and an L for right and left. Super simple to know which side it goes on. And you'd be referred to right and left as if you're sitting in the vehicle. So the left is the driver's side. And your rear spacer. So this will be going on top of your rear coil. That's what these bolts are for. And you have it's like a modified nut welded to a piece of plates. This basically goes up on top and sandwiches the mounting plate there, and then you run your bolt up through the bottom, and then you put your coil up on it. Super simple in the rear. It's probably the quickest portion. The front is really what takes up all of your time on this project. So as you can see there, these are the components: right and left upper control arms, strut preload spacers, rear spacers, rear spacer hardware, rear spacer bolts, front strut top spacer, your top spacer nuts and bolts. This is for your upper control arms. New bolts to the upper control arms. And then your shocks, obviously, and that's all it really is. It's a pretty simple kit. And a lot of people knock rough country as like just cheap, like, oh, it's not BDS or whatnot, but honestly, it's very simple. Their stuff is really quality. I mean, if you looked at the way they build their stuff, I've never had an issue with a rough country lift kit in my life. I've had a handful of them. And I would call it not cheaper, I'd call it more practically pricing for what you get. I would never knock rough country until I had an issue with them, and I have yet to have an issue with them. All their products I've seen, I've got LED lights from them. They're all seen high quality. First things first, get your front end jacked up. Basically what I do is I lift up the front end. I have my parking brake on, wheel chock too, preferably. All right, she's off the ground, so now we're gonna get our jack stands because you don't want to work with it on a jack. A recipe for disaster. Now, since I'm working on dirt, I am gonna get a big piece of wood to put under my jack stand so that I don't have to worry about the feet digging in on one end or the other until it falls over. Now that we get the jack stand, we're gonna slowly lower it. I always like to leave the jack right under there, just so that it's there just in case. So now that we got this open, this thing's in full droop. I'm gonna kind of go through the components of the suspension just so you have an understanding. This is your strut right here on these trucks. It's a full strut, so it's basically a shock inside of a coil, if you don't know what they are. This is your upper control arm. So this is one thing that will be getting replaced. Some lift kits don't come with these upper control arms. I highly suggest you doing it because as you can see with this thing at full droop here, this is kind of what it would be like with the lift kit on it because it's gonna wanna push the suspension lower. And you see this angle in this ball joint, it's gonna wear your ball joint out quicker. So with a aftermarket control arm that is meant for a certain amount of lift, this is gonna help you greatly not wear your ball joints out because it comes at a candid angle, so it compensates. Other than that, you have your sway bar right here. You have your CV axle here, lower control arms, the big piece down here, steering linkage right here. So what we gotta do to take this apart is one, take off the brake, tie it up with a bungee cord or something under here out of the way, but so you're not stressing on the brake line. Then what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna disconnect your sway bar and you're gonna wanna disconnect your steering linkage. Then we can go to disconnect this. So basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna take this off. It probably won't pop off to start. So you have to tap a little bit of a hammer right here to get these to pop. Once you get that done, I also recommend putting a jack underneath it so that your whole knuckle doesn't just drop really hard real quick, because if you drop it too hard and too far, your CV axle could pop out. And your strut, there's a big bolt through the bottom that goes all the way through. Then you have 3 bolts on the top. The strut should be pretty much free. You might also be able to just wiggle it out. So first thing we're gonna do, take out this brake caliper. So basically there's 2 bolts. So it's like 5/8 fits perfectly. These things are worth their weight in gold, let me tell you. Now that we have our caliper bolts off, we want to do is we want to pry out this caliper and get it off of the housing. So I always just come in here and gently, with a pry bar, start pushing it back. Just wiggle it off. So now it's disconnected. Put that there. There we go. There's no tension on your brake line. Caliper suspended. So from this view here, you can see these were the 2 nuts basically that retained the caliper bolts. That's a 21 millimeter. Got another bungee to hold the steering linkage off to the side. Now we're going to take out our sway bar on the other side. The sway bar is going to be an 18 millimeter coming up from the bottom. So an issue I'm running into on the sway bar is just like the steering linkage here. You can see you get your nut. And there's also hex on the bottom of this. So when I'm turning it, it's spinning the whole ball joint, basically. All right, so basically what I had to do down here is I have my 18 millimeter for the nut, and then I have this 5/16 for the spline base. So I basically would have to do is grab the nut with my 18 and then hold the spline in place with the smaller one and then turn the nut off. So this is loose. Basically, once you're able to sag the suspension more, it'll pop right out. So we're good there. Now all we got to do is start getting to this guy right here. So for this, I always get a smaller jack to put under the knuckle so that this thing doesn't just drop. So now, another reason to make sure you get upper control arms is if you can see, this has a leveling kit, obviously. So with that, look at the coil. When you turn it, it actually hits the coil. So that's another reason to have good angles, is because when the angle's out, it'll give it more space to clear this coil in the back. So now, this knuckle can slide off now, and it's gonna kind of hold itself. As you can see, I'm ragging on it. The way to get this off is you want to tap this. Is this ABS wire is like crazy tight. I'm gonna cut the zip tie up here. Something I'm gonna have to do is, as you can see, this ABS wire is basically tapped out. So we're gonna have to loosen this thing up. It looks like we have some extra slack to play with up here, so we'll cut some of these zip ties off. It's a lot looser there, so now I'm not as worried about it. What they're doing here, so that I don't pull my axle out, is get another bungee cable. We're gonna connect it up over here somewhere, and over here. So now this thing won't fall out completely. Now for the fun part, this guy right here. So this is your bottom strut mount bolt, which I'm pretty sure it's a 21 as well. See, it spins. I do need to put the wrench on the other side. So now it actually, you can kind of spin it, it'll spin itself out. It's your lower strut bolt. This is definitely something you want to wire brush the rust off of it a little bit before you put it back. Make sure it's in good condition. It's not worth getting one of these seized. So now your strut is basically loose. And now coming up top here, there's 3 bolts with 5/8 seem to fit. Turn them out. So now you have your 3 top mount bolts off. You got the bottom pried out, and she should come right out like that. Now taking this thing apart, this is where you want to be very careful because it is loaded. And basically in here, take off that nut. But before you do that, you're going to have your spring compressors compressing this strut so that it doesn't shoot this puck off and hit you in the face at Mach 7. Now we got to finish being compressed. As you can see, the coil is loose. So now we can go ahead and take our top mount off and then slide the coil off and then get the tension off of the coil itself. So if you're wondering how it's going, it's not going amazing, but we're just figuring it out. Basically, I have 5/16 on the spline, and then I have my long nose vice grips on the nut, which I'm gonna have to replace this nut because it's so rusted and rounded off at this point. So I have that, and then I have this pair of vice grips holding these vice grips from releasing on me because it is so tight. And then what the key is getting your screwdriver and tightening this more. I already have it tightened a bunch. It's the only way you're gonna get it to not slip. And then keep going like this. Now I have it loose, but before I was basically using a breaker bar on this to get it to come off. So we're free now. So as you can see, this nut is in some rough shape. I mean, I was really raking on this thing to get it to come out. So I'm gonna get a new nut. I'm just gonna figure out what size this is, and we're gonna replace this. So went over to Ace Hardware, picked them up. If you're wondering what these are, they're M12s by 1.25. All right, so now that we basically have this apart, this part can slide up and off, and your coil now can just slide right up and off like this. All right, guys, so next steps here is we're gonna basically be putting our strut assemblies back together. So what you're gonna wanna do is take this and pull this kind of the boot off. Then you have your Rough Country preload, this is the 1 3/8. You're gonna slide it on, and then you'll slide your boot back on. So you got that. Then this would go back on top. Obviously you have to compress your coil. Then you put your new nut on that I purchased. Once you have that torqued down to spec, you can then take the pressure off the coil, let it expand. Let's work on getting these compressed. All right, so you can see we got 4 compressors on this coil. just to play it safe. It's literally free to rent these. They charge you the like 50 something bucks for them. Basically, if you return them, you get completely refunded. So why not go rent a set from O'Reilly and a set from Advance? Doesn't hurt, keep you from dying. We're just gonna have to really be diligent. We're gonna go across. So we'll go here, 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 here kind of deal until we're compressed enough. Now, another reason why I opted to go with another extra set is, I don't know if you can tell, but it has these safety pins that are supposed to slide in and over the coil, so it hugs it on both sides. So with the thickness of these coils, these won't go in. I wanted just to have the extra safety for that reason, is that they don't have that safety measure on them when I'm doing something with a coil that is kind of a... Remember, the tighter end of the coil is the bottom. Ticking time bomb of death. As you can see here, there's plenty of thread to basically thread onto with our new nuts. Just want to make sure I can get this socket in here, which I can. Get your vice grips. And then we will be taking a flathead screwdriver and snugging this up as best as possible. Something to remember when you're tightening this back on, you got to turn the spline counterclockwise so that it's actually threading on. So now you're going to want to take your torque wrench, set it to 50 foot-pound. So now we can kind of start taking pressure off of our spring compressors and putting it back onto the strut itself. And we'll have to just do this to our other strut, and then we'll be good to rock and roll and get this end put back together. So your last step when it comes to these struts is putting on the top strut space. What you're gonna do is you're gonna take this, and there'll be a baggie of hardware, little stud bolts look like this, and they got splines on the bottoms. You wanna find what hole it does not slide easily into. And what you wanna do is you wanna put it in, and you're gonna kind of have to thread it through just because the powder coating grips it a little bit. You wanna have the head of it on the inside. So this is gonna be mounted in like this. These 3 holes will go through here, and then you have your new studs coming up. So just thread this through. You might have to use a pair of channel locks if it just gets a little too hard to turn, depending on how thick the powder coating got in the hole. Some of them go right in easy, some of them not so much. Thread them down to where the splines are. So you can see, once the splines hit, it won't go any further. So what you can do is take up 2 blocks like this, stick it so that the stud sticks down between the 2, and then take your ball peen hammer. There you go, they're all pressed in. That's how it should look. Next bit you want to come to is mounting it on here. So basically, you can see there's like a little serial number here on this like kind of triangle. This is your back edge. So you're gonna want to take the one that has the point to it. You see, these are rounded. The point goes to the front and slide it on. Now I have my factory OEM strut top mount bolts. I'm gonna put those on. So they're gonna go on the factory studs. I'm gonna use my gun just to get it to the base, but I'm gonna use the torque wrench on it. This thing is set at 40 foot-pounds. Your last step is you do need to cut down the stock studs on the strut. We're going to take an angle grinder, and we're going to cut those down flush to the top of the nut. If you don't cut these down, studs will be sticking up and hitting the top mount, so this won't be able to sit on this surface. Now this strut is all set, you're going to use the included hardware that came with the kit for the new strut top mount bolts. Now we're good to go and get this back in the truck. All right guys, so now we're gonna take off this upper control arm, which is honestly a lot easier than you probably think. It's just a 21mm bolt, one here and one here. The nut has a built-in stop on it, so it's not like you have to hold 2 wrenches on it. So we're just gonna get these broken loose, which is not really that hard to do. So you're gonna wanna retain your hardware. This is what I was talking about, how it's a nut with a stop built on, so this catches on frame metal and allows it not to spin while you're turning this one on or off. So. And voila. Now to show you guys basically the difference between your new rough country upper control and your old one. In your old one, this is all like polymer or rubber crap in here. It's not even solid metal. This is 100% cast. Now look at your angle right here. So I have the ball joint is basically level there. And when I put the ball joint level here, look at the angle of where the mounts of the upper, you basically have 2 inches extra play with this one. So that's gonna keep your ball joint angle much leveler and not like this. Now to install your new upper control arm, place it in its spot. From the outside in. And you have your stops. You want to have the washer side in. Put that on a little bit. Now I got my torque wrench. For the final torque spec, you're going to want to set it to 130. Just like that. Brand new upper control arm. I am going to leave this little sleeve on here to protect the threads until I'm ready. All right guys, so time to put our front end back together. First things first, what we want to do, get our strut in and make sure our strut is aligned correctly. So we're going to push it up into the top first. Get the holes seated with 3 bolts up top. The lower wrench should just push right in. So now we have our 3 brand new strut top nuts that we're going to thread right onto the studs that we press through. And before we tighten the top ones, we're going to take our main lower strut mount bolt, push back through the bushing. You might need a little persuasion to get the holes to line up. Put your nut on the other side. I got my impact with my 21 millimeter. You can take your torque wrench, set it to 125 foot-pounds, 15 millimeter. Now we got our torque wrench set to 40 foot-pounds. So now we can start putting back the remaining components. We're gonna put on our upper control arm. Gonna use your Rough Country supplied nut. It's the black nut. Take off the bungee cord. The best way to help getting this back up where you need it is using a jack to compress the suspension a little bit, enough so that you can get that nut threaded where your knuckle meets the control arm. You can also utilize a pry bar. Stick it on one of the coils and use it to pull the upper control arm down. Okay, let's thread it on there. And that'll be a 21 millimeter. So once you get this pretty well tightened down, it'll start spinning with the nut. You're gonna wanna use, I got a 7/8 or a 21 millimeter there, and then you have a 10 millimeter for here. So basically, put this on here, and you tighten them against each other. So it calls for 40 plus 180 degrees of turn once you hit 40. So we're gonna get to 40, which we're already there. So now we're gonna go to 2 quarter turns. Now we're gonna reinstall our steering linkage that we got pulled up over here. And this basically just goes right here. So you're gonna have to adjust it, your steering, until it wants to sit nice. 21 millimeter nut that goes in the bottom. So these two wanna spin together. You want to set your torque wrench to 55. Because I got to get my sway bar link back in to where it goes down here, and then I got to get my brake caliper back on here. So guys, something I did not think of when I put this all back together is I didn't have the sway bar lined up in the hole, so it was sitting like out here somewhere. And when I put the other side back together and this side, tightens up this sway bar base. Doesn't allow for it to move. So make sure you have this lined up with the hole before you get your strut tight. And I basically had to take a jack and put it under here and jack it up, and then take a big ass crowbar and flex it till I could get it up and over and in the holes. It was a real pain in the ass. I'd probably have a hernia now. So don't be too surprised if you get to the point where you have to recompress your caliper a little bit. And don't be alarmed if your brake wiggles like this after you put it on. It's just because it's compressed, and as soon as you touch your brake for the first time, it'll push brake fluid into your caliper, expand, and then it'll be solid, not go back and forth like this. Now, next thing is I want to secure this ABS line. I want to put it back on the hook that is behind the knuckle right here. So I'm going to turn that like so. Push your ABS line right into there, holds it in place. So coming up here, I did undo some of the zip ties up here just to give it a little bit more slack. So what I'm gonna do is just throw another zip tie around the top here and where it meets the brake line. So now it's a little looser and you don't have to worry about it getting overextended and ripping out. All right, guys, well, this concludes your front end portion of this lift kit. Basically, everything's back together. We just got to put the tire back on this thing and then get it off the jack stands. Simple as that. It only took me about 12 hours. Kidding. I don't know. It says 4 to 6 hours on the installation instructions, but I'd give yourself a good weekend just in case you run into any snags or whatnot. All right, guys, so looking at this, it's significantly noticeable. Before I was sitting at around 9 inches from top of tire to my fender well. Now we're sitting at exactly 10.5. So we basically gained about 1.5 inches from the previous setup, which included that 1.5 inches leveling. All right, so we're getting started on the rear portion of this installation. So basically what I do is I take my jack and ignore the wires. I'm working on something else there, but jack it up from the differential, get both tires pretty well off the ground, and then we're going to put jack stands, but not supporting the axle. We want to be able to droop the axle. I'm actually going to use a steel beam and then jack stands on top of the steel beam. Now, what I forgot to mention, before I jack up the rear, obviously I have the parking brake on, but that's only pulling on the brakes on the rear. So get some really good wheel chocking going on. I got both tires chocked just like that to make sure that we don't roll forward there. So coming over here, shout out to my Badlands Harbor Freight off-road jack. This thing is freaking awesome. There we go. Letting our rear suspension sag, and we're free. Now we're in full droop. Make it way easier to pull those coils out. Got plenty of room to work. The jack, I'm keeping it just below the differential. You will probably need it to jack up the sides and whatnot. Get these wheels off. All right, first thing you're gonna want to do after you get your wheels off, take off your wheel well liner. 5/16. Take our sway bar off. It is a 18mm bolt. All right, so we have my vice grips on the nut on the back side, and then I'm gonna take my impact on this end. So now we're gonna get our upper mount. You're definitely gonna wanna hit this with some PB blasters. You can see it's pretty rusted, probably from salt sitting on it. And then you're gonna need an 18mm wrench and 3/8 for these one. You no longer need this guy. Pulling out this coil is pretty easy. You do need to save this. This will be reused. This is your top isolator. If you didn't see where it fell out, basically you're gonna have this plate, which is gonna go up on top. Slide it in back here. There's like a little hole right in the middle here. It sits perfectly in the middle of that. This is your lift block. It goes up just like this. So your coil sits here, but you wanna make sure you put your isolator on this. Press it on, it'll stay. Then you're ready to install. You're gonna need the included hardware. So your hardware goes up in this hole right here, right through the middle. And you're gonna fish it up. Put your hand on top to hold that plate in place and start getting this threaded. it is now time to put our coil in. You are going to need probably two of your spring compressors again to compress it enough to the point where you can just pop it in. What we'll now do is start decompressing until it's sitting where we want it to. And there you go, fully decompressed, it's sitting perfectly. And the spring compressors are out. All right, let's break these shocks out and take a look at them. It comes with brand new bushings, big washer thing, and it comes with your new top nuts. So you do not need to reuse that on your old shock. You got some Rough Country decals. So as you can see here on these shocks, it has a string. Do not cut the string until you're ready for it to expand. So for your shocks, it has the cup washers and the bushings. Basically, what you want to do is put a cup washer on, a bushing with the neck that comes up facing upward. Then you will put it up into its place on the shock mount. After that, the stud that sticks up through the top will then take the bushing that has kind of the female end. It'll go over your stud, and then your last cup washer, and then your lock nut on top. Stick that through. Just gonna get the nut started. Now I got my lower bolt in. It's in place. It's not gonna fall out. Doesn't have to be tight. Good to have a little wiggle room. And I have my bushing on the top. I have my cup washer, and now it's time to start cutting this string. There you see, it'll start extending. Let it extend up. See if it goes all the way up. I assume it will. There you go. So we see the hole. Plop on your bushing, your cup washer. Get our lock nut started. My bottom mount. All right, so now your suspension in the rear is all set. So as far as spec goes, I go to 50 down here, 32 up here according to their instructions, and then I did about 40 on the sway bar. Now all that's left to do is to get our wheel well liner back in. All right, guys, we got the wheel well liner buttoned up. It took so long, I grew a beard. You know, that's how it is sometimes. No, just kidding. Been super busy. It's actually been 3 months since I put the lift kit in, and I'm just finishing doing the outro, if you want to put it that way. I couldn't be happier with the end result of this Rough Country 3.5-inch lift. Also, the HD coils I got. Definitely check that out too if you're looking to improve your towing. Basically, I've been driving on this thing for about 3 months now, and I've had 0 issues. The ride is still really good on this thing, even with the added stiffness of these coils. The bumper does not sag the front anymore. I can tow and load the back up, no problem, and it doesn't squat it like it used to, which is a huge improvement. You do feel a little bit when you hit really big bumps or going over train tracks, just like you would in a 2500. Basically, it's nothing. The lift has been great. Been checking on it, no issues. The stance of the truck has just drastically improved, and everyone has been commenting on how it's not like too big, but it's not just stock, so, and it's nice and leveled as well at the same time. Well, that basically concludes my video, guys. Go check out this lift kit on Rough Country's site and the upgraded coils. Hope this helped you guys. Drop any questions in the comments. I'm always watching them. Stay tuned for more videos like these. Enjoy.